With grim control of Corpse and Crimson, the Necromancer is a playtest class given to us by Paizo in the impossible playtest, controlling a horde of undead thralls and destroying them just as swiftly as you create them. The Necromancer holds great power with their attachment to death, both in how they create and prevent it, as they see fit. I am Claude J. Dean, this is Abaddon's Academia, and we're going to see what aspects of this class break the mold and introduce new, wonderful ideas for us to play with. Allow us to begin this navigation by going over a quick summary of the class. First and foremost, Necromancer is your usual 8 HP per level class. Its key attribute is Intelligence. It has Occultism +2 plus Intelligence number of skills, which is slightly below average, but most things that have a key attribute of Intelligence are generally lower, as well as most spellcasters generally having a lower set of skills. Unlike most spellcasters, however, it is expert in Fortitude rather than Will, which does well in selling the fantasy that a Necromancer's body can endure through poison and necrosis, and aids it in a far more melee-centric area that several of its options seem to incentivize you to utilize. While there isn't the best option for your defenses, as you are only trained in light armor, and that can generally be rather taxing on a melee build to have 3 attributes that they need in relatively high margin, it can be easily fixed with armor training. Personally, I believe giving access to medium armor could be a good way to further incentivize a closer range Necromancer, as we already have a spellcaster that is rather close range and happens to have medium armor in the Druid. And this includes and incentivizes people to potentially play for heavy armored classes and variants of the Necromancer to give them access to medium armor. But perhaps this could simply be a path if they do not wish for heavy armor to be approachable by Necromancer easily, to instead give one of their subclasses that we'll go over later a armor training as its general feat. Next, we will go over the spells. The Necromancer is a occult prepared caster that has slightly below average daily per rank, but are not in the same restriction that Summoner or Magus is, to where they only have their 2 highest. You are a focus-centric class, with your focus spells being known as grave spells. You also have the ability to regain a focus point in the middle of combat, which I think is a great introduction that many other classes should get something similar to, that progresses their narrative in their class in the same way Consume Thrall does. You do have a grave cantrip that you can use, which creates the thralls. However, I would like to go over that later, as I have many things I'd like to discuss about it. But we will go over the starting grave spells that you will gain from your Grim Fascination or subclass. And you can choose to gain one of these as a class feat later, but you will at least be given one depending on what your Grim Fascination is. For Bone Shaper, we have Bone Spear, which is for skeletons and you sculpting them into a weapon. It is a range 10 feet, target 1 creature, although this has to be a thrall. It is slightly odd that it doesn't mention that, given all the others do. You shape a thrall into a spear or jagged bone, destroy one of your thralls, and then you make a line from that creature, make an attack roll against all the AC of the people in the line. It does a small amount of damage to start, but scales relatively hard. I would prefer this to be 2d6 to start and scales by 2d6. And that could be rather impactful and helpful to make it really hurt to start. For this class, the line is far easier to meet as you have relatively good map control and restrictions on where people are positioned. So I do like that they're giving it an AoE aspect, given this is one of the classes that can utilize it. Although there will be circumstances to where the enemies are like 1 melee, 1 range, or just a single big enemy, and you won't really be able to use Bone Spear in that situation. Next, For Flesh Magician, we have Dead Weight, which is 60 feet, one of your thralls, which this one does mention, and then that thrall chooses a creature within 15 feet of it, and pseudo-grapples someone. It lowers their speed, immobilizes them if they fail, grabs them if they critically fail, which is relatively impactful. The spell ends if the thrall is destroyed or a creature that failed to save successfully escapes. This is a little sad because it usually reads that the creature can get out if anyone sends a single action, since the thrall can just be attacked and destroyed, as we'll discuss a little later. But that does accrue multiple attack penalty. I do wish it were to ask of the person caught by it to be forced to escape. Also, for this to have a upcast, perhaps something similar to Tanglevine, where the number of rounds increase, but your method to get out doesn't really change. And that could be a relatively interesting concept to have, as you'd have a sustained immobilize at range. Afterwards, we have Spiritmonger, which deals with spectral creatures, ghosts, and whatnot, and it is a life tap. Life tap is 30 feet, target one creature, or one thrall. That thrall then moves up to 30 feet to target a creature adjacent to it. Force them to make a fortitude save, or be drained, depending on their degree of success, and to heal you or an ally the amount of HP they lose from drained. I do like introduction of the drain condition for the players. However, I do slightly wish this were to be attached with some small amount of damage. Even if it were to be a really low scaling D4 void, I think it needs to have more initial oomph, as many players, at least that are new and don't fully understand the powers that you can get from a pseudo-permanent penalty to their fortitude saves would offer you, are going to see this and not want to touch it whatsoever, in comparison to the others, which are far more immediate and understandable in what they do. And Bone Spear hits hard, Dead Weight stops them from moving. I do wish Life Tap were given just a tidge more damage to help out players that are far more damage-centric and merely want to see big hits and go, wowza. But I do think overall it is relatively good and sells the concept of ghosts stealing the life from a creature. And I do understand that the drain condition is powerful. As such, I would only suggest that it's like a D4 extra void, and every 2 spell ranks, so 3rd, 5th, etc., increase it by a D4. And adding this void damage into the heal, so the HP swing is a little more impactful and helpful to people that don't necessarily build around utilizing the drain condition. You could perhaps shrink down the size of the range on it, but I don't necessarily know how big that's going to be required if you were to add something as small as D4s to the damage. But that will then lead us back to create Thrall, and I will go over exactly what a Thrall is. They are undead creatures, always. They are not minions. Do not take any other actions. You can make them do things, but they don't get anything special. They just kind of sit on the battlefield. They're small or medium. You get to choose which, although most of the time I'd always assume you'd want medium. They can help you with flanking, as if they had melee arm strike, even though they can't attack. They have a single HP. Any attack automatically hits them. Any saving throw they make automatically fails. A Thrall is immune to bleed, death effects, disease, mental, and poison. They're mindless undead. They are level -1 regardless of your level. And spells or abilities that create them gain the Thrall trait. Overall, this is a pretty simple thing. What you are, like, narratively doing is kind of just putting a corpse on the field. And the corpse occupies its square. Yes, you're going to want them to be like zombies and stuff, but they don't really do the main thing. There's not much difference between you throwing a corpse at someone to do your bludgeoning damage and a zombie punching someone, unfortunately. And the method that this works, we will now go over to create Thrall, which single action, which is really uncommon for a spell to be able to make an attack, which is relatively cool to have. The range is 30 feet and duration 1 minute, so a thrall cannot last more than a minute out on the field. You conjure forth a expendable undead thrall. The amount you make increases as your level, and when you cast, you can have up to 1 created by this spell make a melee unarmed attack using your spell attack modifier. It does a single d6, bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing. This uses your multiple attack penalty and heightens every 2 spell ranks. This is okay damage, and a relatively cool thing to have a single action, because many casters have that single action they don't really need to use after they've assumed their position and stride into where they want to be. Yes, there are some cases where you want to move in other ways, or spell shapes you might want to utilize, but it is good to have options for what your last action after using 2-action spell will be. To show an example of what I mean by this, I'll do a rough recreation of the events that occur. We have Necromancer Maha and Loudest Bark in a dispute against one another. With the Necromancer going first, they would be allowed to do something akin to this, getting 2 attacks in, and then pass the last one back here. In order for Loudest Bark to engage in his opponent and not have to deal with his fodder enemy, he would have to attack, immediately succeed, stride, attack, immediately succeed, and that would be his turn. Then she could simply put 1 here, attack him, put 1 here, attack him, and you put 1 here. You got 2 attacks on him, and he has not done almost anything in the time. If we were to have even expert necromancy, the first turn gets significantly worse. We can set him there. We get 2 for our first casting, 2 for our second casting, and 2 for the casting after that. And while this outcome would only let us have 1, unless we were to set it up and change how we did the casting, this isn't something you can get through without proper AoE, as we'll simply keep flooding, and we'll get to a point where we can even spend our other actions to do something else, because he simply won't have the means to go through. And yes, let's say Loudest Spark had an alchemical fire, an alchemist fire on them. That single hit here destroys all of these. AoE utterly ravages this concept, but you shouldn't assume every single enemy is going to have AoE. I don't think building around that is a good idea, even though the requirements of the DM are relatively small, because you just give them a single bomb and then they can stop most of the setup. It's just, if that were to happen every encounter, then you are slaughtering their thralls, and that can have other negative outcomes that might not be wanted. And yes, in a situation where instead we're fighting from this distance, and there's a wider area, first rank, we can't really hard stop them from engaging us in at least one of the turns. They get rid of this one single action, then they can stride to here. There is a outcome where if we are Flesh Shaper, as I intend for them to be, they would only get to here because of the difficult terrain here. And that would hurt them and need to spend another action to even break in. But if you were to assume not, then they can get an attack here at their second attack penalty, because destroying a thrall requires an attack, and as such accrues a multiple attack penalty. And that option in this outcome doesn't exist when you have access to the ability to make 6 in a single turn. I like the concept of making a mass of undead. However, you are greatly hurting the ability to ever have indoor combat with the Necromancer without introducing a surplus of AoE just to counteract them. I think it would be far better if you want a horde style to introduce swarms that they can travel through as difficult terrain, so that it's not as, no, you just can't do anything about it. And while, yes, there is the suggestion that, oh, well, if the setup is, like, this, or this, can't Louder Spark just simply tumble through here? And to that, I have to go, I don't know. Thrall says all attacks automatically succeed against them, and all saves they make automatically fail. It tells us nothing of anything else or the checks therein. Another issue is we have some effects which occur on critical successes, but we don't know, should we assume, oh, the automatically succeeding and automatically failing means they automatically get the worst of that. By base reading, no, that's not what Thrall does. But that is relevant for a wide multitude of things. Going back to one such, alchemical bombs get bigger if they're a critical success against the creature. So that is something we would need to know, because it is mechanically very important if the undead thralls were to be far more spread out and not simply caught within a single blast. But if you were to perform a critical hit against this, you destroy all of them. Do I think that, like, there's other ways to fix this without going to means of giving them AC and other stats? Yes, possibly. I just think it is the easiest to give them the system that we use for everything else. And as such, I would like to introduce a change to Crate Thrall, which maintains the level that you're going to be allowed to have multiple thralls on the battlefield, but gets rid of their, I put down a body that just stands here for the rest of the encounter until someone interacts with it, either me or my opponent. And as such, I will pull that up now. Moving on to my changes, we have, as I will detail it, Necromancer Inspired. You can get access to this PDF via my Patreon. It'll be for free. You'll be able to find that in the description. And the main things to note are, at least in the immediate, changes to Thralls and a change to the Create Thrall spell. The first thing that I would like to change about Thralls is that we are going to set some set conditions on them. Firstly, their level will scale up as you do, so they're not permanently level -1. They'll have a HP value, which will be exceptionally minimum at first rank. So until you reach 3rd level as a Necromancer, you'll generally have around 5 HP on your Thrall, and as such, most hefty melee hits will be able to drop them, but things like bombs and other very minimal AoE damage effects won't destroy them. Additionally, I'm going to give Thralls a AC and a DC, as it is stated here. It's level based for Thrall's level, which is, once again, yours -2. And while at level 1, we don't necessarily have the stats for that, I would put that roughly at 13. So they have an AC of 13, and any of their DCs would be 13. And if they would need to make a save, they simply use the DC -10. So in the case where they have a DC of 13, then they have a +3 to their saves. And the final thing, just to ensure that even in bad cases, if they make an attack against a Thrall, the Thrall is going to be at least damaged to some degree. If an attack misses a Thrall but doesn't critically miss it, it deals half damage to the Thrall, much akin to how a creature succeeding their basic save takes half damage. But here comes the main limiter to spamming up walls, in that Necromancers can't control vast swords of Thralls, and instead have a hard cap on how many they can have. If they were to create another, they can choose to destroy one of their pre-existing to create that another and fill up their slots. You only start with 2 Thralls. As you reach Expert, this becomes 4, 5 with Master Necromancy, and 7 with Legendary. So this will ensure that to start, you aren't able to hardwall off things. And as you get later, you'll be able to get access to more thralls and have a bigger field on the map. However, I have greatly reduced your ability to spam out thralls. As you can see with Create Thrall, now by base is a 2-action spell. Most of the mechanics of the spell remain the same. However, you have new options that you can choose to sustain it, to choose a thrall that already exists, to allow it to stride up to 15 feet and perform an unarmed strike, much akin to casting the spells beforehand, keeping some of the single action spell that exists beforehand. And you have the ability to choose to cast Create a Thrall using 2 actions, while you already have one, to sustain it for free, enabling you to both create and control one, and even giving you more battlefield control in various ways. Namely, that if you were to have the 2 thralls, the one that you are sustaining and the one that you're creating, make attacks against different creatures, you do not increase your map until after, allowing you to attack 2 creatures at the same attack penalty and not need to worry until after. Or, if you want them both to attack the same creature, to, rather than make an attack, force the creature to make a save. The damage is slightly less than if it were to be hit by 2 attacks, but given that it is save, they're more likely to be able to take these slightly increased damage than they would otherwise. Additionally, to keep up the ability that this can be your third and final action after casting a spell, you will have the ability to cast Create Thrall as a single action during that turn, or if you have Expert Necromancy, even as a reaction. And when you're doing so in this, you can still meet the other requirements to be able to sustain as a free action as a part of casting it, so allowing you to keep up this as long as you are casting stronger and more powerful spells. And at Master Necromancy, while normally you'll only be able to create 1, Master will now let you make 2. If you have Legendary, you can make 3. It doesn't change how many you can strike, just as before, just how many you can place down. Although you can choose which one you'd wish to sustain and have them move some degree, as they are no longer just stationary objects and instead allowed to move in slight motions and do light hits. Additionally, if you have a special type of Thrall, which we'll go more into detail later, you can sustain this to make the attack from the improved Thrall's space and maneuver said Thrall in various ways. Many of these already have the ability to move them, but this is in case they were to add future ones or things of that nature, just to have the setup for that. Next, I would like to go over the change that, yes, I like Mastery of Life and Death. Let me scroll to it relatively quickly. It's just below here, I believe. Yep. That whenever you cast a spell or use an ability that would deal void or vitality damage, use the weaker of the target's resistance or immunity to void or to vitality. For the instance, if they're immune to void but are not immune to vitality, i.e. they're an undead creature, it does vitality damage, and vice versa. The main issue with this spell is a fair amount of occult spells will have the condition that, oh, in order for you to cast Void Warp, you have to target a living creature. So, in Inspired, which has all of the changes that I intend to apply, it is simply that if it specifies a living creature, you can also target undead creatures and vice versa. So you don't need to necessarily worry about the targets stopping you from being able to utilize it. Then another thing I think would be an interesting thing to do is improving Necromancy to where it's not just a number increase and increases your base Thrall stats. As you can see, they scale up with all of them to improve your Thrall's life, giving it a higher HP pool if you wish for them to be like a frontline. You can improve their mobility if you wish to ensure that they are going to consistently move about and get into the proper positions you want them now that you have access to move them. Or you can just go the simple route of increasing their damage a fair bit. This also increases to Masters, where either you can choose one of the expert options, or to improve the option you chose on Expert. With Legendary, you can choose 2 options for Master, which, if you desire, could both be an Expert option. If you were to choose Life and then improve Life, and you're like, alright, Legendary, I kind of want to improve their damage a little bit and their mobility. Or you could say, I'm going to, in the same scenario where you chose Life for Expert and Life for Master, that you're going to choose Damage for Expert, downgrading, and then Expert for Master for your 2 Master choices. Additionally, a change to the class feature that you get at 20th level, Perfected Thrall. I understand that it is a very different way for a Thrall to work, but Living Graveyard feels a lot of what you'd want out of it in the same way, because of just how many Thralls it creates. So I suggest that with these Necromancer changes, Perfected Thrall perfects your Thralls, and puts them to an even higher tier than beforehand. Yes, this increase of HP is going to make it so they can consistently survive more hits and be more durable than the base intended is. However, I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing to have, as long as we keep in mind that we're going to hard cap how many they can place down, and that they're not going to be able to consistently stop people from traveling just by vomiting forth a bunch of Thralls. Next, a couple of class changes that I suggest. As the creator of the Enhanced series, there is a change that I consistently do that I will give a caster that wants to have a Martial class feat, that we give them +1 circumstance bonus if they do something that is in flavor of the class. Generally, it's if you hit with a spell or they fail a save against your spell. But I think with Necromancer, we could make it a touch differently and make it so that if they're near your Thralls, be able to save against one of your grave spells, or you hit with a grave spell attack, that could be your qualifier. So if they stay around your Thralls aid you in striking them, which could potentially even apply flanking to make them off guard, making it effective +3 to hit, which is very nice to have when you are a caster, if you wish to make it so your weapon have any chance to really hit consistently. Additionally, we have Conglomerate of Limbs, Skeletal Lancers, and Living Graveyard. A light change on them to make it so they accommodate to the new Thrall base rules. The main thing to note is that their movement that they'll move is in relation to what your Thrall movement is, as it could increase, and their HP is in relation to what the Thrall's base HP is, rather than have a flat number. Skeletal Lancers, I think it deserves to get a light change. I'll go scroll to it real quickly, as it is a little rough to go about in the current. Let's load in. That you place 5 Thralls in different spaces within range. These Thralls carry Skeletal Lances. When an enemy makes a strike while within reach of a Skeletal Lancer, it does a flat 5 to them. There's no save. They just kind of take the damage. They only get that once, I assume, per strike. And this makes it relatively rough, because unless they have range options, they have to take 5 damage to try and take out the Skeletal Lancer. As such, I slighted it about a bit to make it so they make a basic reflex save, 2 less damage than your Crate Thrall's damage dice, so it's damage dice and a save. Creatures that are within 5 feet and aren't making the strike against a Lancer suffer a penalty to a reflex save, as if they're off guard. They can only be forced once per round, so if they make multiple strikes, they don't have to suffer each and every time, which could hurt a monk-style enemy that is going to make mathematically significantly more attacks than others would. And then that it can stride a bit further, because its base stride speed is relatively high, so I gave it a status bonus to its stride speed, which you can also see with Living Graveyard. With the cap on Living Graveyard, I decided that we will make it so that you can destroy Thralls to repeat its effect, to potentially knock people prone in a large area, and that will give you something to spend on your thralls, given that Living Graveyard is so it creates such a vast amount of thralls that you're not usually going to be able to use all of these without having something to consume en masse. Yes, you have a later thing which allows you to really consistently just consume them up, and these two could combo relatively well together, as this makes 3 per round, and this consumes up to 3 per round. They do have to be within a certain distance of you or your target, so there are worlds where you can't necessarily do it well, and just overall light changes on some things to stop littering on the map to really outrageous levels. Next, I will be going over my own personal homebrew creations for Grim Fascinations, which were, as seen previous, are subclass options, which, while we have skeletons, zombies, and ghosts, there are several other undead that I wish to discuss and see as they are. I do note personally here that I prefer armor training for the general feat for Spirit Monger. That is mainly because I don't like Die Hard, because you don't want to see it come up all too often to where you have to use Die Hard to survive. Dying is not something you want to ever get, so it's not something you generally want to build around. And armor training would increase your survivability because you'd be able to access greater armor. But if they don't want to do that, that's more than fine. So the few that I have is a Flesh-Craving Fighter, which is for ghouls. The Historical Haunter, which is for mummies. The Dreadful Demise for wraiths. And the Hemoromantic, which is for vampires. So for ghouls, I wanted this to be a martial suggested, so they're going to get weapon proficiency, which will boost up their weapon options to get potentially better weaponry that they can utilize. And whenever one of your thralls is destroyed, you can choose a willing creature within 10 feet of the thrall as a free action or as an action later to feast upon their flesh, as ghouls have a lot of consuming of other creatures, to gain temp HP equal to double Crate Thrall's spell rank for 1 minute, and if you were to use something like Muscle Barrier, which grants temp HP, this will be cumulative with the temp HP gained from this, just so that these options aren't necessarily hindered. And your general feat that you get access to, but anyone else could gain access to, is Betrayer's Urge. You spend 15 feet, and not spend, but you target a thrall within 15 feet. It strides up to its speed to an adjacent square of a creature, and it whispers into the ear as it dies, leaving its death haunting in their mind. Creature must make a will save, and for the duration of the spell, they must strike towards your enemies, or make a strike against one of them, or take mental damage. But if they do attack their own allies, as they would be your enemies, then they get some temp HP back, which could play in the thing that you're driving an enemy mad, and they're getting consumption and cannibalistic urges to destroy their own allies. And could sell good for various fights of perhaps a hobgoblin general is cast this on him, and he goes ruthlessly slaying his goblins that he cares not for. And you might be able to make up a resurgence that these goblins are getting slaughtered by their commander, that they have to resist against them, and could potentially cue in various things and interesting ways for you to play. But otherwise, it is effectively the Agitate spell as a focus spell. Next, we have Historical Haunter, that has you deal with mummies. And while the Thrall enhancement isn't the strongest, as it simply allows you to ignore resistance and hardness that targets have with your Thralls and Grave spells, making it so your damage is far more impactful and hard to be negated by anything. You generally might want other things, as resistance and hardness don't come up all too often, but that is cancelled out, or at least modified, by Corpse-Bound Curse being a powerful debilitating effect that almost guarantees sickened on the target, which is really impactful and can consume some of the enemy's actions. And to those that succumb to the curse, they take void damage, their eyesight begins to fail, and they gradually fade away. And if the creature flees from you and your thralls, then they get a lesson on the curse of they've broken into the Pharaoh's crypt, and you have bestowed upon them a haunting memory. And for their general feat, well, it doesn't necessarily interact with the class. Adopted ancestry is a really interesting thing to come in, and it's a historical haunter. Your study on other cultures and their dead, and how their curses of their crypts work, is what allows you to interact with other ancestries as an option, making the flavor relatively rich for you to play as a Indiana Jones type necromancer that knows a lot about various cultures. And as for Dreadful Demise, we have a very much focus on a specific area and containing people, as Crushing Night is your grave spell, which creates a smaller zone much akin to the Darkness spell, and your thralls as creatures of shadow do not need to care as much for it, allowing you to use Create Thrall to beat on creatures within it while they can hardly even fight back, with incredible initiative allowing you to set in darkness before the opponent even gets to act, and Thrall Enhancement making it so you can do reduced damage to suppress creatures unless they interact with your thralls and stay away from your allies, which can be impressive debilitations and keeping them in these dark zones and other areas that have debilitating effects if they wish to not have to suffer the downsides of the suppressed condition, which is the -1 circumstance penalty to attack rolls and -10 circumstance penalty to speed, as seen in Starfinder 2E's playtest, I believe. And then finally, we have the Humoromantic for those that wish to dwell within vampires. And it gives you pet, which could be a bat, a wolf, or many of the other creatures of the night that acts as a small companion to you, much akin to a familiar. And your Thrall enhancement is that your Thralls sap the max HP of their targets, reducing their healing as you siphon life out of them to make them nothing but dried husks as their blood drains out of their body. And they get a unique single-action grave spell known as Grim Celebration, where you slaughter one of your thralls and encourage all of your allies to bask and dance upon this crimson glory as their display, playing into the vampiric nobles that have luxurious and grim celebrations and fascinations that they wish to dwell upon. And it enables them to step and stride, enable movement for your allies, and playing into Necromancer's battlefield control in an interesting way to keep your allies in just the right positions where you need them. And personally, I think these could add great to encourage Necromancers to have several ways that they go about it. As the main thing many people think of is like a lich to control undead, but with some of these, they can have very different themes that they play into, and that still fit all of the mechanical effects of Necromancer. As your Humoromantic might have the vampiric thralls, these mindless little blood banks that you keep around and have run into their deaths, as you care not for the peasantry that you control. Or ghouls, that your thralls perhaps aren't even undead creatures, but merely tantalizing meat that corrupt and taint those that see them and bear witness to them. And these could add great effects to the narratives that you could tell. And I would like to thank you all for sitting with me through all of this, as this will be the end of all this. Once again, you can find Necromancer Inspired with it on my Patreon for free to download as you want and utilize as you want. If there is anything you have questions for, feel free to leave them in the comments. If you have any desires for other things that I should go into for Pathfinder 2nd Edition, feel free to, again, leave them in the comments. And I hope to see you around soon for some more interesting dives into all the wonderful things you can do